All right. Good morning, everybody. I know that the participants kind of move off and then move back on. So I'm going to go to the chat and say good morning to everybody. And it usually takes a couple of minutes for all of that to move over. So if everybody can hear me, then when you get back on, if you can put something in the chat that says you can hear me, that would be great. We still have a few more minutes as people are joining, so we can keep the chat going. I know it just takes a little bit of time. It always takes much longer than I expect because I'm like, wait, what? Where's that first chat coming? To know that people are actually on. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm so glad to know that. I feel like my cortisol spikes until I get until I know that like everybody can hear us, and then I feel good. And it's always, I feel like the day that you have a webinar that you have all the technology challenges. So
That's exactly what happens.
that's right. It's so good to see you, Nancy. I was so nice to briefly see you in person the other day. So happy to see all these familiar names, at least for me, Michelle, and a lot of folks have come to many of our webinars, and so it's nice to see that. I'm curious, since we're here for the few minutes before we're going to go ahead and start, has anything changed for you, Brad, pre and post becoming a full-fledged author? Was there
That's a great question. Not a lot has changed, but I would say that the feedback that I've gotten from the book has just been really, really amazing. What my favorite thing about it is just talking to people and hearing what their takeaways are, hearing what really resonated with them. But my life in general hasn't really changed much. It was just a fun passion project that I was really, really passionate about. And it was something that I've always wanted to do. And now, I can kind of use it to try to help other people that have similar needs. And so not much has really changed. I still have a full-time job, and it was just kind of a side project. But I'm really glad I went through it, and it's been really fun talking with people about it.
I bet that there were learnings out of the book that were so different than you expected out of the process of writing the book, because it wasn't just the actual content of the book. I'm sure it was probably the idea that you had to manage, like from an executive function perspective, right? You had it so much you had to manage, and you still had this full-time job. And um, I should have asked you if it was okay to share, and a growing family.
Oh, for sure. No, absolutely. We're very excited. Yeah, my son Declan was about 6 months old or so by the time I started writing the book. So it was nice to be able to pull on some of my experiences with him, as a learner, as a father. And now we're getting ready to expand our family again at the end of October with a baby girl, which we're very excited about.
Yay.
And just so it's helpful to think about learning from multiple hats, trying to put yourself in the shoes of your kid and like what their world is like right now and what they're experiencing and what might be going on in their head. And it's just been an amazing experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that feeling you had when you first held the book. It's not like when
Pretty
you first
wild.
told your child, but it is kind of a similar experience, I'm sure, even though I'm still on that other side of wishing that I had written the book.
It's never too late. It's never too late.
Yes, I believe that. I think you have to have a great relationship with fear, do something every year that really, really, really scares you. And then you start to see that you can certainly move past that. So I think that's great. Last year I did, I jumped kind of off a mountain, and what was that? Paragliding. So that
Oh,
was my big thing.
fun.
Yeah, it didn't take quite as long as writing a book,
But you
um,
certainly have to get up a lot of courage for it. That's for sure.
but you certainly have to get up a lot of courage. So it's another
Yeah.
relationship. So I usually wait till about 9:01, and it is 9:01. So I
Yep.
will welcome everybody. I saw in the chat that at least Emily can hear us, if that's your name, Emily, Emily. If everyone else can hear us, or you want to just practice saying good morning in the chat, we would love that. So my name is Debbie Rosen, and I am the founder and one of the owners of the Study Pro. Lindsay is in the background, making sure everything runs effectively here. And if we have any problems, then she'll share links and other things that might come up. We're going to more formally welcome you, Brad, here in a minute. So I just wanted to go through a couple of things. This is being recorded, and we will share that recording and any other resources that come out. I was super excited when I heard about this book, and then when I read this book, as Brad will tell you, I took unbelievable amounts of notes, and we've had many, many conversations between then and now. And I think one of the things that I hope that everybody takes away from the webinars that we do is this validation of great ideas that we already might have and maybe implemented, but then new ideas and thoughts that we really haven't, pondered. And so I think that's the theme of this presentation. I thought I would share, just for those of you who don't know anything about us, we are an executive function and study skills center, and it's very much in line with the conversation that we're going to have today with Brad, and how important it is to manage the process of school. And it's not just about being smart. That's, a huge theme. It's not just about the content. It's not just, as we say when we're presenting at schools, it's not about what we hope for our kids when they graduate, that they've learned to do homework. What we really hope for those kids is they've learned to do hard things. And so that's, again, that theme that we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation today, or that Brad, you'll be talking about. There's a lot of things that we do here, one-to-one coaching, a homework center, which is what I'm sitting in, study skills courses, writing coaching, because it's very process-oriented, very executive function dependent. And so we also host these webinars. We don't have this one quite online yet. It's going to be going online on Friday. So I just want you to mark your calendars. We are very lucky this year to have a number of authors. We had last week, a couple weeks ago, Raising a Kid Who Can. Now we have Phyllis Fagel, who is a therapist and author of Middle School Matters, and now Middle School Superpowers. So she's going to talk on October 19th. And then I'll go to this one first. And then a few other authors that are coming up that we're so excited about. We have monthly webinars, but these are 3 other dates you might want to mark for other extraordinary, in this case, women who have are both authors and professionals and have so much to share. Kathleen Nadeau was the PhD who actually created or did the first research at NIH on women or girls with ADHD, and she's just unbelievable in terms of her knowledge. So we're very excited to have all these women here over the next school year, over this coming school year. And then the other thing we do is free workshops, which in this case we have 2 free growth mindset workshops. These are for 4th and 5th graders, and they are in person. So I'm sorry if you're not local, but this QR code will help take you to the one that we're having on the 30th, which is getting our mind set for math. So we're excited about that. And then we have the writing workshop on the 21st. So we are very much looking forward to those and to hosting everybody. They're usually sold out. So with all of that said, I guess I'm so excited to formally introduce you, Brad. And as I'm introducing, I'll stop sharing so you can start sharing. But I think what's so interesting in the conversations that we've had is this mix that you have of coming from classroom environment through kind of supporting environment and actually living a lot of what you talk about in the book, creating experiences, both technology-wise and maker spaces for kids that will help them become 21st century learners. And as you said, you founded, well, you're a parent, and so you're starting obviously to share that with your growing family. You founded an organization so that you can share that more broadly. And now you've written this book, which is amazing. And congratulations on your recent promotion also, so that you can really take technology to another level at the Langley School. And as I stop sharing and allow you to start sharing, I wanted to bridge the conversation from into your presentation. That one of the things amongst the many things that I thought was so fascinating about the book is that the evolution of the word smart. And we talk about this all the time with the concept of growth mindset, but that you talked about, we moving from intelligent, containing a large amount of knowledge, to having the intellectual and emotional capacity to solve problems. And that is what's required for 21st century learners. And one of the things that I took away of many, many things is that, when you think about the analogy of the basketball player, which I know you'll share, being tall will only take you so far, right? Being smart will only take you so far, especially if we don't know how to ask great questions, if we don't know how to solve complex problems. And so, how do we get the education system as well as parents to shift their thinking and change how they're managing, basically the environment for kids to cultivate the kind of learning that we need in this world of AI and automation, where you can look anything up, right? And I think that's the question that we have. So with that, I want to give you a very, very warm welcome. I think this is a very important topic, and we're certainly super excited to hear what you have to say. As I'm turning it over, sorry, last thing, we are going to take questions at the end. If you have any burning questions, I will monitor the chat and interrupt if it's contextually important. But otherwise, we'll mark all those questions and then take those at the end. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here with the Study Pro and be able to share a little bit about what I'm passionate about and what I think hopefully can help our learners today become better learners. And so the title of this session is Redefining Smart: Strategies for Cultivating Successful Learners. And so I'm going to be touching on points that I wrote about in my book. It's going to be kind of scratching the surface, but kind of drawing out some key elements that I think will be relevant and helpful for today. And I'm just really excited to be here and, share some of my passion with you all. So thanks very much for having me. Just a little bit about me. I know Debbie introduced me, but my name is Brad, and I recently wrote the book Knowledge Able. And I'm so excited because it recently won an award, which is great. It was an Independent Publishing Book Award for the category of education. And that was just an honor. My first book won an award, which is amazing. Thank you very much. And I'm just super excited to be here with you today. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I'll share a little bit about my backstory in a minute. But even though I'm the chief technology officer at a school right now and work mainly with technology, I still consider myself a teacher at heart. And so I always say I'm a teacher first and a tech guy second. And so some of what I'm going to share with you today is going to involve some technology, but it's also not going to involve technology, just some best practices with learning. But I was a middle school math and teacher for a long time. I ended up transitioning and teaching technology in middle school. I got my administration degree and wanted to pursue leadership. And I decided to pursue leadership with technology and education because I'm really passionate about it. So it's very nice to meet you, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned over my course of 16 years in education. Here's just the cover of my book. It's called Knowledge Able: Igniting a New Generation of Lifelong Learners. And like I said, I'm just going to be scratching the surface of this book today, but hopefully being able to, enlighten some of the highlights that are in my book. And so I'm really excited to share that with you. And if you're interested in learning more, you can find my book on Amazon. And so here's a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to talk about 4 key areas as it relates to learning and redefining SMART. So we're going to focus on the why first, thinking about why this topic is so important and why it's relevant today, why it's relevant now. Then we're going to be focusing on the what, right? What are the conditions that can actually help to amplify learning? Then we're going to shift to the how, which is going to be really important for you all. How can we contribute to the development of lifelong learners? In this case, talking about our students or even ourselves, if we want to try to take away and apply some of this knowledge to ourselves. And then finally, thinking about all the information that was discussed and shared, thinking about how you can actually take away and apply this information to yourself, to your children, to your life, thinking about what action we can take to play an active role in our child's education. And so that's kind of the structure of this session today. So we're going to start off again with the why. Why is it important? Why isn't it relevant? And why now? So I'd like to start off with sharing a story that I do in the introduction of my book. Here's a quick spoiler alert. In the introduction, I share a story about kind of why I became a teacher. When I was a kid, I used to help my dad a lot in the yard with different projects. He was really good with woodworking and with his hands, but he wasn't really good at communicating, and he wasn't really strong with letting me know his expectations and actually how to do things. And so, he used to get really angry. He used to take out his aggression on me a little bit, just verbally. No big issues, but it tore me down a little bit mentally and psychologically and emotionally. And I remember this one time when I was about 10 years old. He asked me to go get a Phillips head screwdriver, and I didn't really know what that was. He never really took the time to explain that to me. And so I grabbed what I thought was a Phillips head screwdriver and brought it back to him, and it was a flathead screwdriver. And I just remember him getting so frustrated and upset with me. He couldn't believe that I didn't know what a Phillips head screwdriver was when I'd been helping him all this time. And it just really, really broke me down. And so that's just one of many different examples of when I would have to help my dad, and I was scared, I was nervous, I didn't have confidence in myself. And so, that continued pretty much for the rest of my life, until I became a technology teacher. And I started teaching career and technical education. And I wasn't certified yet. I hadn't really taken any technology classes, but my principal at the time, she had asked me to take this role. And so I had to study and pass the Praxis 2 in career and technical education. I think I only passed by like 1 or 2 points, which you'll learn I'm not a very good test taker. That's something I've come to learn about myself. And I had the ability to start using these different kinds of tools and teaching my students how to use them. And this was such an empowering moment for me. And so I thought, what can I do to really help really overcome my past with my father. And I decided that I was going to do a project. I was going to make a wooden box for my dad. And so I had a shop class. I got all the materials. I got the wood. I got my Phillips head screwdriver, which I knew about. And I totally, from scratch, assembled a box. I painted it, I sanded it, and I put a fixture on it. And I went to deliver it to my dad after it was done. And I told my dad, I said, "Dad, I have a surprise for you," when I came home. And he said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "I have to show you." And so I went to my car, I opened up my trunk, and I presented him the box. And he said, "What is this?" I said, "Well, it's a box that I made all by myself, and I want you to have it." And he just had a smile on his face, and he just said, "I'm really proud of you, son." And that, I feel like, was a monumental stage in my life where I had kind of overcome my fears of learning and working with tools. And I was able to show him that I was able to overcome all that. And, with writing my book, I asked him if I could share that story. And he was reluctant at first, but then he said okay. And so my relationship with my dad, because of that, has just gotten stronger. It was really difficult to surface that with him and tell him how I felt for so many years, but it is really, really strengthened our relationship. And so that's when I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to help other people, let them know that they can do anything they put their mind to. And I try to be as supportive as I can in my role, and making sure that nobody feels like they're dumb or they're stupid or they can't do something. And so that's kind of the preface for the book. And that was my inspiration. And I'm going to share a lot of other lessons that I've learned in education because of that. And one of my favorite quotes is from Seymour Papert. We will promote the learning of being a better learner. And that's the most important skill in a rapidly changing world. And so that's the whole basis of my book and my whole mentality about being a teacher, trying to help students become better learners. And so I'll talk a little bit about the title of my book in a minute, but that's really what my message is about: helping people become better learners, helping students become better learners, and how we as parents can help cultivate that in our children. And so Debbie mentioned the idea of what it means to be smart. And I believe that it has evolved very quickly, actually, because of the way the world has been progressing so fast. We used to have to memorize all these different things before the internet came around. And now with the internet, we have access to the world's information. And so I think now what it means to be smart is really how to problem solve independently and collaboratively, to help you make decisions about things that are going to benefit you. It's not about, your IQ, or it's not about how intelligent you are. It's really about being able to problem solve and being able to find and leverage resources, and just really being reflective and able to overcome problems and obstacles. And so we're going to look a little bit of data that's going to support this. And so if you were to Google the word smart, right, this is kind of what would show up, right? Being clever, being bright, being intelligent, right? It's basically about how high your IQ is, essentially, right? And how that's measured in school. But really, I think there is a shift based on new data in the workplace in terms of what skills are really going to help us and what skills are going to be considered smart moving forward. And so in my book, I call this the Jeopardy paradox. And the quote that I have by Tony Wagner says, "The world doesn't care what you know. What the world cares about is what you do with what you know." And so I call this the Jeopardy paradox because a long time ago, a long time ago, like 30 years, right? Um, on Jeopardy, we used to think the people on Jeopardy were really, really smart because of how much information they could retain, right? And how they were able to recall all that data. But now, since the world has progressed, that skill isn't as highly valued as it was 20 or 30 years ago. It's still very impressive for the people that are on Jeopardy that know this wealth of information and can recall it, right? But we're not really using that information in a really productive way. What we have now is we have lots of different resources to be able to access some of that information to help us make informed decisions and to problem solve. And so that's kind of why I call this the Jeopardy paradox. And in my research, I found that there is becoming more, I would say, more reliance on right brain skills, which are typically thought as the creativity, context, empathy, synthesis in the workplace and in the real world and in life, as opposed to the left brain skills, which we previously valued a lot heavier before the use of technology. And those were answers, text, logic, and analysis. And while both are very, very important, there's becoming an increase in the need of right brain skills. And so I find that interesting, because the rise of robots and AI, the ability to empathize and the ability to collaborate and to ask questions, right? These are a lot of things that robots can't do, and that is part of the human element. And so while a lot of these left brain skills are becoming automated in our world, there becomes more of an emphasis to be able to adapt and acquire these right brain skills. And I think that is what is going to help us to transition to smart, or the new smarts, moving forward. And so, what can we do as parents to help cultivate these types of skills in our students? And that's what we're going to look at in a little bit. And one thing in my research I came across too, which you might have heard before, is Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. And so instead of asking the question, "Are you smart?" right? We need to transition and think about asking our students how they are smart, right? Because we all come up with different aptitudes when we're born. We're naturally good at some things, and some things require more energy and effort. But we all have some individual skills that make us unique. And that's why working in groups is so helpful, right? So thinking about how our students might be able to identify what they're good at, how they're smart, not if they're smart, because I truly believe that everyone has unique talents and strengths, and we need to try to find what those are and then leverage those and help them to build their confidence. And so here's the idea of the book Knowledge Able, right? If we were to look or research the word knowledgeable, it pretty much means intelligent or well informed. And this is what I found on Google. But if we put a hyphen in the word, then we start thinking about the able part, right? What does it mean to be knowledge able? And what I argue is that it takes lots of different skills in terms of both emotional, psychological, academic, cognitive, to allow us to become better learners. And so rather than thinking how much information we know or acquire, thinking about what skills it takes for us to learn, to become better learners, right? Thinking about how we can improve our learnability, or our ability to learn how to learn. And that's the whole premise of my book. And so the ABLE is actually an acronym that I created, which is why it's all capitalized in the book. And so I created what it's called the ABLE cycle, where you start off by first asking a question, then believing in yourself, and then L for leverage resources, and then E, execute the task. And what's nice about this is, learning is cyclical. The more questions we have, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more questions we have. And so chunking this into the ABLE cycle is something that I think really helps our students if we were to break it down this way, and to really think about, if I want to do something, if I want to learn something, how might I be able to do that? Well, we can use this ABLE cycle. We need to make sure we ask a question. We have to believe in our ability to be able to ask that question, answer that question, and then be able to solve that problem. Then we need to think about the different resources that we have access to and how we can leverage the best resources. And then finally, executing the task, and then making sure that we reflect and think about our progress, and knowing that we will be able to continue making progress with every iteration. And so here's it a little bit more broken down, right? When we ask a question, we want to craft and refine what we call a driving question. And that question is going to carry us through our entire project, or answering our question. Then we'll need to believe in ourselves, identifying our needs so that we can help build our confidence. And then leveraging resources, like I said, utilizing different tools, people, strategies, and materials. All of those are different resources that we can rely on to help us answer that question or solve that problem. And then again, finally, executing the task, taking action, and reflecting on the process, and getting any form of feedback, whether that's from yourself, other people, the process itself. All of those elements are going to help to create better learners. And so to thrive in a rapidly changing world, our students need to become knowledge able. Put simply, they need to learn how to learn. And I believe that providing the right conditions that we're going to talk about and fostering the learning process, we can enhance anyone's ability to acquire information and skills that are needed to accomplish anything in life. And this is a quote directly from my book, and this is kind of my motto. This is what I truly believe. So now that we have the why, the purpose, right, we're going to focus on the what. What are some of these learning conditions? What are some context that's going to be relevant? And what are some strategies that we can use to help us? One of my favorite quotes, I'm going to share a couple quotes throughout this presentation, is, "I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn." And that's Albert Einstein. So if we think about our role as parents or teachers, right, we don't necessarily try to project our knowledge onto somebody else or impart our knowledge to somebody else. We want them to have their own light bulb go off in their head. We want them to make discoveries. We want them to investigate. And so what we can really do to help our children is to provide conditions that will allow them to be a really good learner and allow them to thrive. And so we're going to explore what some of those conditions are. I mentioned earlier that I'm not a very good test taker, and I'm still not today, even though I try really hard. I found that that's one of my growth areas, I guess you could say. I wanted to share another quick story about the SAT. When I was a student, I was very, very hardworking in school. I ended up finishing 10th in my graduating class just because I worked so hard. But I really struggled with tests, especially like multiple choice tests. And so when it came to the SAT, I took my SAT and I got 1,000, and I was really disappointed because I was hoping I would get a better score. I had really high aspirations to get into these different colleges, and so I talked to my parents, and I was like, maybe I need a tutor. Maybe I need to figure out different strategies. So I got a tutor for a couple months, and I felt like I was making really good progress, and so I took the SAT again, and guess what I got? A 980. I had actually dropped 20 points after all that work. And so after that, I was deflated, I was defeated, I started thinking I wasn't smart, and it was really, really challenging. And it wasn't until I was older and grew up a little bit that I learned that, even though I wasn't a strong test taker, it didn't reflect about how smart I was or my intelligence. And I learned that I had other growth areas and strengths like creativity and some of those right brain skills. And so it was a difficult lesson to learn. But now, as a teacher and learning so much about the act of learning and reflecting, I've learned that was a really interesting learning experience for me. And this is another great quote by Paul Tough. Students who obtain qualities of high work ethic, such as grit, motivation, and perseverance, as well as good study habits and time management skills, were more likely to be successful in college and in the workplace. And I read a book about how children succeed by Paul Tough. And he found that it wasn't the students that were highly intelligent. It was the students that were, they were conditioned almost to work hard and to have high expectations, were the ones that were actually going to do much better off after college. He found that, people that were highly intelligent sometimes wouldn't work as hard because they didn't have to. And so he found that people that had these other skills, were more likely to be successful because they were used to working hard and overcoming whatever obstacles they had. And so we can take this idea and we can think about how we can instill these types of conditions and character traits in our students so that they will be more resilient and have more grit in the face of adversity or overcoming obstacles. And I just thought that was really enlightening. And we've probably learned a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And another thing to consider too that I found interesting is that we all have needs. We all have our basic needs, but it's not until those needs are met till we can really thrive, right, into that self-actualization or self-fulfillment needs. That's when we really start to take off and start to excel. And so the conditions that I'm going to talk about are going to be a little bit different from our basic needs to conditions that we need in order to thrive. And so taking this idea, I came up with learning conditions that I think are relevant for students and children to be able to thrive when it comes to learning. So here you can see we have our basic needs, and then the learning conditions to thrive are kind of broken down by the same categories, right? So we have for physical, different tools, resources, and strategies, right? All the way down to social, inspiration, belonging, support. And then thinking about our psychological and emotional, having a growth mindset, allowing yourself to have autonomy and purpose, which Daniel Pink from Drive tells us, and then also being curious, having grit and courage. Those are some of the learning conditions that I focus on in my book and that I'm going to touch on a little bit here. And so in my book, I realized that two of these conditions were curiosity and courage. And I thought that if a student or a child had high curiosity and high courage, that would set them up for success for any type of learning. And so I found that if we have an axis and we have high curiosity and high courage, I call this audacious exploration. And that's kind of what I think students should strive for, to have this sense of audacious exploration, where they're so curious that it's going to continue their drive for learning, and that they have enough courage and confidence to be able to see that all the way through and to tackle that project, right? And then there are other areas where you can still learn, but it's just not as successful, right? So if you think about vigilant inquiry, which is to the left in quadrant 2, right? We're still really curious, but we might not have enough courage to actually start or finish a project. And so that can be dampening. And then if we go to quadrant 3, we have apathetic trepidation, right? And that's where you have low curiosity and low courage. And you're probably not going to end up learning much in that quadrant there. And then finally, we have reckless indifference. Reckless indifference is when you have very low curiosity, but you have high courage, which means that you're kind of wandering around aimlessly without any direction. And that can actually become dangerous at that point, where you have high courage, but you're not really curious as to what's going to happen. And so the sweet spot is this idea of audacious exploration. And you can think about it like climbing a mountain, right? High curiosity, high courage. That's going to allow people to be able to climb a mountain or tackle any difficult learning challenge or face any different adversity that you might overcome. So thinking about how we can instill curiosity and courage in our students. And then another really powerful lesson that I did in my research was learning about growth mindset and grit. Carol Dweck is the one that wrote the book about growth mindset, and Angela Duckworth wrote the book Grit. And I thought about how can we combine those two ideas to make something new. And so I created this little table thinking about the relationship between growth mindset and grit. And I found that in the middle there is what's called persistent improvement. And that's another area that we want our students to be able to strive for. We want them to have a growth mindset, and we want them to continue to work hard. So with these two ideas in play, high curiosity and high courage, and then having a growth mindset and having grit, if we have those 4 conditions, right, that are going to be able to help our students and children become knowledge able, I truly think we're going to be able to have them be successful no matter what the task is or no matter what their environment is. And so, really thinking about those conditions moving forward. And one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Edison is that I have not failed 10,000 times. I've successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work. Right. And that goes back to both the growth mindset and grit. And, it was also a funny story that I share in my book that, he didn't have success all by himself and he wasn't an overnight success. And a lot of times in the media, we and students hear about these overnight successes, but we really don't uncover how much work actually went into those overnight successes. And so this is just another reminder that everything in life takes so much work and resilience and grit and growth mindset in order to succeed, but we don't always see that in the media. And so that's a fun conversation to have with our children. And I also wrote in my book that I discovered in my research that Thomas Edison's mother, Nancy Edison, acted as what I call a learning conditioner. And so she was actually a teacher. She was trained as a teacher, but then she took time off to stay home more. And she found that Thomas Edison really wasn't getting as much as he could at the school they were at. And so she took him out of school and she created a learning environment for him in their basement. And so she created the conditions to allow him to be able to thrive and to succeed and to tinker and to experiment. She created this whole basement area in her house, which was just like a mini lab for him. He, tested physics, he tested chemistry, she got him books. And so she didn't actually teach him anything, even though she was a teacher. All she did was provide love, support, encouragement, helped him build his confidence, and provided the resources and the space and the time for him to really go ahead and begin this learning. And so that's what we want to think about as parents and as teachers, being learning conditioners, right? We want to teach them how to learn information for themselves. It's way more fun to discover something on your own, to have that light bulb, pun intended, right? Have that light bulb go off rather than for somebody to tell you the answer. And so that's what we really want to try to focus on is how can we position ourselves to share these conditions with our children so that they're set up for success in a place where they can make discoveries on their own. And that has the natural byproduct of feeling successful and having that intrinsic motivation. And again, in my research, I did a little bit of digging as to how we actually learn. Like, what is the science of learning? And I created these 5 different areas that I think can be helpful for us to remember. And if we were to try to structure a learning environment for our students, whether you're a teacher or a parent, or if you're a learner and you know about this, you can really think about how you learn things in these 5 categories. And so when we learn, we first need to excite the mind. And this research is called the input stage, right? We need to be curious or excited about something. And then we need to chunk or divide the content. And this is what in research is called the storage process. We need to get excited about it. We need to be alert. And then we need to kind of start segmenting and categorizing this information in our brains. Number 3 is exercise different levels of thinking. And that's the process. And so these are the different types of cognitive thinking processes that we do and able to internalize this information and actually create meaning and understanding. 4 is devise a plan. Then, after we create this meaning and we construct this knowledge, we need to be able to apply it somehow so that it sticks. And so after that, you have to think about how can this apply to my life? Can I go ahead and take this information and run with it? Can I go ahead and apply this to something that is meaningful and relevant to me? And then finally, it's revise the work. That's the reflection stage. Being able to have that metacognitive stage where we're actually thinking about what we did and reflecting on the process. John Dewey has another favorite quote of mine that I love. It's, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And so I really, really find that powerful. We could go through the motions and do things in our daily lives and not even really think about it. And we wouldn't really learn much because we need that reflection time. We need to actually think about what it is that we did. How can we improve? What could we do next time to allow that information to really sink into our long-term memory? And naturally, we can think of our brain as a muscle, right? So when you work out, you add resistance to try to build your muscle strength. The same thing applies to our brain, right? We want to gradually become more involved in difficult tasks so that our brain stretches and grows and has more endurance and power, right? And so that's a really neat analogy that I came across that I think is just really interesting. We need to exercise our brain. We need to add resistance. We need to add weight to it, essentially. Because from a neurological standpoint, we have these neural pathways in our brains, right? And the more we engage in what we call productive struggle, the more we start to build these neural pathways. And so productive struggle is where we have students that children that are engaging in some type of challenge, right? And they can't do it successfully by themselves yet. And so they're working through how to overcome that challenge or how to overcome that obstacle, but they need a little bit support, or they need a little bit more time to play with whatever it is the task that they're doing. And so what happens is, if we continue building the strength and creating these neural pathways, right, we get these clear connections through our brains. But if you've heard that term, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? That's because if you don't do something and continue that, these neural pathways, they start to close up, right? And so you see what a weak neural pathway is. It's like a forest that continues to grow, and the shrubbery continues to grow over the path if it's not used, right? And so we need to continue to activate that brain. We need to keep those neural pathways clear, and adding resistance and adding additional challenges, it can really help with that. Also, in my research, I discovered what's called the learning quotient, and I write about this in my book as well. We tend to focus a lot of our energy on IQ, right? Our intelligence quotient. And sometimes we can even become obsessed with that. Like, what is my kid's IQ? How smart are they? Right. In my research, I found that IQ can actually be increased over time. It's not necessarily something that we are born with. And so that really enforced or reinforced the growth mindset for me. And then I started learning a little bit more about EQ, right? The emotional quotient, and how that relates to IQ. And I think there's a big movement now for social emotional learning, which I totally agree with. And I think it's amazing that we're really focusing on those skills because they supplement the IQ or the cognitive side, right? So we have the left brain, which is the IQ, we have the right brain, which is the EQ, but the learning quotient really is all about, how successful of a learner someone can be. And we can increase our LQ over time just as we can increase our IQ and our EQ. And so the LQ, I found, is the optimal place that we want to try to focus our energy on increasing, right? It's how likely someone is to be able to learn new things, or what's called their learnability. And so you see this triple Venn diagram here that I created. Each of these can develop over time. They're likely to help our goals, and also they're used to help problem solve. But it's really when we include both the IQ and the EQ and helping us use those right brain skills with the empathy, the context, synthesis, things like that, is where we really make sense of our knowledge. And then that helps us to be able to use some of those character skills like the grit, resilience, growth mindset to help increase our learnability for our overall learning quotient. And speaking of, IQ, which Debbie kind of referred to earlier, this is one of my favorite quotes from Malcolm Gladwell. He says, IQ is a lot like the height of basketball players in the NBA. You need to be at least 6 foot or 6'1" to play at that level. But past a certain point, height stops mattering so much, right? And so you can think about IQ the same way. We don't need to have a super, super high IQ in order to be successful, right? We just need to be functional at a certain level, and then other skills come into play that helps us become more successful, right? So it's kind of like the height of basketball. You don't need to be 9 feet tall. It's not the taller you are, the better a basketball player you are, right? You need to be a certain height in order to be able to excel. And so some of those other skills that are important, it's like ball handling skills, free throws, shooting, passing, right? All those other skills need to be improved after you reach a certain height in order to really excel. And you can think about that with IQ and EQ, right? We need a certain level of intelligence, and then we need to supplement that intelligence with some of those other EQ skills like courage, confidence, curiosity, right? Grit. Those things will be able to help us become better learners. Okay, so here's the third part, halfway done. How? We've learned why it's important. We've talked about what are some of those learning conditions that we can use as parents and as teachers to help our children become more successful learners. Now we're going to look at different ways in which we can do that. How can we help to accomplish this? So we're going to look at some guidance and advice and some suggestions. So I believe we need to provide students with opportunities to engage in what we call productive struggle and to support them to be able to develop those skills to become more confident. Right? This is a direct quote from my book, and I really like to focus on that productive struggle element. I can't reinforce how important it is to allow students to go through productive struggle, even though it's difficult. We want to swoop in, we want to rescue our kids, and we want to make it okay, and we don't want them to be upset. It's natural instinct for us. And so it's hard for us to, take a step back and allow them to engage in this productive struggle. And so, anytime you can try to catch yourself and only help support where it might make sense, or only provide some help where it's not giving them the answer or giving them too much help, is going to really help our children in the long run. And so, it's this concept of be less helpful. Even though it's in complete contradiction of what makes sense to us, it doesn't feel innate, right? It doesn't feel good. But to be helpful, it's often better to be less helpful. And so I think about my own kid, right? My son is 2.5, and he's a lot of times he's like laying on the floor, "Daddy, help me, I'm stuck, I can't get up." And I'm like, "Declan, I know you can get up all by yourself. I know you can. I love you. I'm going to show you that I believe in your ability to do this." And so, I find my son always trying to get help for things. He's also reaching out and showing love, which is great too. So I pick and choose when I do it. But that's just a clear example of something that your child can do clearly by themselves. Just trying to have them do it by themselves, or just give a little bit of support. And so that's not really a great example, but if you can have that mentality and that your students or your children can do something, being less helpful will help them become more independent and be able to problem solve and overcome obstacles that are in their way. And so this is a little flow chart that I used in my book to help us think about the next stage in the able cycle, right? We first have to ask ourselves a question, whether that's consciously or, subconsciously. We tackle problems all the time. We go through the engineering design process multiple times a day to help us make decisions and to, solve problems. We don't always stop and think about, what is my question? But we really do that subconsciously. And if we stop to think about what our actual question is, what our problem is, we'll have more focus and direction. And so that's why I ask everyone to really think about the question that they're trying to ask. And then if you don't believe in yourself yet, or if you say, "Oh, I don't have the time," or "I don't have the resources," right? You lack that confidence in your ability to be able to answer that question or solve that problem. And at that time, it might not be the right time, and that's totally fine. Or you just might need to build up a little bit more confidence in yourself. And so if you're not able to fully develop, the plan and the confidence to be able to answer a question or overcome a problem, we need to work a little bit on trying to remove obstacles in order for you to do that, or to try to figure out ways to build your confidence. And that could be lacking certain skills in a particular area. Maybe you might need to dedicate more time and energy to developing a skill or multiple skills in order to answer that question or solve that problem. And so it's really about stopping to take a quick snapshot. Do I have a question? Do I feel like I'm fully able to answer this question or solve this problem? And then we can help our students be able to do that. And this is probably the most important thing that I think I will share in this session today. It's this idea that was developed in 1978. It's called the zone of proximal development. And this is something that I continuously use as a teacher, and I continuously use as a parent. And what we want to do, in a sense, is try to provide the right amount of scaffolding and support for our children so that they can eventually do tasks independently on their own. And so, in the black area of this ring, that represents what learners cannot do at this moment. Maybe they don't have the confidence, maybe they don't have the skills. Okay. The gray area is the support from an outside mentor or guide. In this case, this would be a teacher, a parent, a coach, right? The middle is where we come in and we try to provide the right amount of scaffolding and support. We don't want to provide so much support that we actually solve the problem for them. And we don't want to provide too little support so that they can't overcome the challenge. And so it's really finding that right balance, and which is really hard to find sometimes. You really have to know your student or your child, right? Or player if you're a coach. You really need to know that person and how you can best support them. So relationships are key, and making sure that you know that person really well is going to help you. And then just trying to figure out the exact support that they need so that you can slowly reduce that scaffolding, slowly reduce that support so that they can confidently and competently achieve that task on their own moving forward. And that's going to be the same process we use when students or children struggle things at home and at school. We assess the situation, we figure out how we can provide just enough support so that they can become independent and do it on their own later. Right. And so this is something I always think about when I'm working with my child, with my son, with students in class. How can I provide enough support so that I can get that road of independence to where they can do it successfully on their own? A couple quick reminders too, just in general. A good philosophy to have is mentor over monitor. And so, as you're helping and supporting your child at home, thinking about how you can have conversations with them rather than kind of micromanaging them. There's a lot of research that shows that the micromanaging sometimes can backfire, and sometimes doesn't build trust in healthy relationships. And so, really, if you want to learn more about what your student is doing at home, with schoolwork or any other challenges, have a conversation with them. Ask them, what they're currently learning. What are they working on? When are the due dates? Right? Really taking an interest, in what it is that they're learning or doing. And then you can still monitor, but it's just trying to, make the mentor part a little bit bigger over the monitoring part. Sometimes students can get turned off with the monitoring part. So just really focusing on building that relationship and asking questions and asking how you can help support them. And here are some things that you can consider trying, right? If you want to try to extend learning at home, or building relationships with your child, here are some things you can do. Tell me about what you're trying to learn. What are your questions on this? What strategies have you already tried? What else could you do? How can this apply to your life or the real world? What might you want to learn more about? And when you do this, you're not giving them the answers, right? You're giving them just enough support to help guide their thinking and their action. And what you're doing by asking questions is you're building that relationship, and you're trying to let them know that you trust them to be able to do this. You're helping them build their confidence. You're coaching alongside them, and you're showing an invested interest. And so these are some different ways in which you can help extend learning at home. And another thing that I like to remind people is to praise effort over intelligence. We want to tell our children that they're smart and that we love them and that they can do anything. But in terms of praise, it is often better, and research and studies show that it's often better to praise a child's effort as opposed to a grade that they've received or the outcome, right? And so, wow, you worked so hard on that project. I am so proud of you. I know how much time and energy you put into it. Wow, congratulations, right? As opposed to, oh my gosh, you're so smart. I knew you would do such a good job with this project, right? And so thinking about shifting your praise to the effort, because that, the research shows, is going to be more successful in the long run. That grit, that resilience, those are the characteristics that are going to help us become better learners and help us become more successful. And so it's still fine to talk about, how smart your kid is, and praising their intelligence, but we really want to focus more on their effort along the way, because that seems to have better outcomes. And so here are a couple scenarios to try to explain this. Let's say your 5-year-old is physically struggling on the playground, right? If we want to think about providing the right amount of support, we could go back to some of those questions. Maybe they're having some physical limitations and they're getting really, really frustrated, or they start crying, or they fall, right? You could say, what are some strategies that you've already tried? Have you considered doing X? Or, wow, that looks really, really hard. I know that's probably going to take some more practice, but I know you can do it. You just have to put in a little bit more time, right? So thinking about the physical limitations in learning and growing. And let's say you have another example. A 12-year-old is socially struggling with navigating their peer relationships, right? Sitting down with that child and asking some of those probing questions, not to try to, spy or to try to know what's going on, right? It's coming from a place of concern and care, and so being genuine. What are the things that you're struggling with right now? What is the situation, and what have you tried? Asking what they've tried already is really helpful because then they can think about, well, have I tried to solve this problem already? Or am I just looking for answers right now? And so starting off with what have you tried already is a really good starting place. And then asking them the follow up question, well, what are some other strategies that you might be able to try if those strategies didn't work? Or it just might take a little bit more time. So, continue what you're doing, and continue thinking about, other strategies that might help. And then finally, let's say a 9-year-old is struggling with classwork at home with their homework, and they're just maybe just not quite getting it, whether it's math or if it's grammar. Asking them those same questions. What is it that you're struggling with? What strategies have you already tried? How can I best support you? As opposed to coming with a lens of, when is your homework due? How many answers did you get right? What do we need to do to get a perfect on this? Right. So just focusing on that growth mindset and the relationship building, and then just enough support so that you're not doing the answer for them or you're not doing the work for them, but you're kind of coaching them. You're that guide on the side, supporting them along the way. And then finally, what now? Now that we've talked about a lot of information, which is probably like drinking water through a fire hose at this point, what do we do with this information? How can you apply some of this information that I'm sharing with you with your own children at home or into yourself as an individual learner? So let's think about a couple things. My recommendation is to have the analogy of thinking that your child at home, whether they're working on a homework assignment, whether they want to do something outside of school and do something fun and creative, is project management, right? And a lot of that really gets at to the executive functioning skills. So if you think about your child as the project manager, they're the ones that are owning the activity. They're the ones that are in charge of it. The parents are just the consultants, or the teachers, we're just the consultants. We're there to help support, provide guidance, maybe a little advice, some structure, right? Those are the things that we as parents should be doing for our students to help guide them, to giving them just enough support so that we're not doing things for them. They're learning, they're engaging in that productive struggle, right? And they're overcoming some challenges and some obstacles along the way. And so, encouraging them to do what makes sense to them in their mind in terms of structure, giving them suggestions about maybe how to plan your time or how to dedicate certain resources, right? Being that consultant, but allowing your kids to be the project manager, is kind of a fun analogy that I've come up with. And at school, I've actually had the opportunity to do this. For about 7 or 8 years, I taught an elective in middle school called the 20 Time Project. And you can think of this at home as well if you wanted to do some sort of project that your child might be interested in. The idea came from Google and a bunch of other big tech companies that allowed their engineers 20% of their work time during the day to be dedicated to a self-directed independent project that would have to benefit the company somehow. And so 20% of their time, they were not micromanaged. They got a chance to be creative, try to solve a problem that they thought would benefit the company. And some really cool projects came out of that. Gmail, AdSense, a bunch of other really cool projects came out of that 20% time. Now, it was an unofficial policy, and it's kind of gone away now. It was kind of experiment, but that idea kind of trickled its way into education. And so it kind of got into a place where we can think about how we can allow our students to have a little bit of extra time to be able to work on independent projects and support them along the way. Okay, so thinking about asking your child, what are they passionate about? And then supporting them as a consultant when they're the project manager. So that is kind of the ABLE cycle in a nutshell. Having students ask a question, helping them to believe in themselves and build confidence, leveraging resources, and then executing the task, and reflecting on the process. And in my book, I offer this knowledge able action plan that have some supporting questions to think about if they do want to do a project, or if they do want to learn something, or if they do want to overcome an obstacle, to think about how they can add this structure to help them accomplish anything that they desire. And so I would like you to pause and ask some questions and really think about what your takeaways are. I know we're running short on time, but really thinking about, of all the things I mentioned, what are some two or three takeaways that you feel like, really stuck with you or really resonated with you and that you'd be willing to try? And then as you think about some of those takeaways, also think about what has challenged you today. What has been reaffirmed? And then what might you do moving forward? And so I'll allow you to have a minute or two of reflection time to think about your takeaways and these reflection questions, and then open it up to some questions really quickly.
Yes. I don't know that I want to fill the space while people are reflecting, and feel free to change to share in the chat any kind of takeaway that you had, any reflection, maybe something that changed your perspective in terms of what smart meant, or what how you're going to interact with your students or children. I think that would be great. We'd love to hear what anybody has to share. I thought a lot of things, it really is thought provoking. There is so much information and it's really thought provoking in terms of how you think, okay, how much am I really monitoring versus mentoring? Or, when how much am I asking about what has to be done versus maybe how they may be getting things done? And I was thinking about the able cycle in terms of even doing homework, right? How would I, when I get stuck, how could I ask myself a question? And even as parents, how could we as parents ask our students to ask themselves a question about where they're stuck, and then what they believe they could do to become unstuck, right? I know that's not
Absolutely.
exactly believing themselves, but I think that's kind of a micro view of that cycle that could really
Yeah,
help us have those conversations versus just monitoring. um, because we often tell kids to get started on their homework, but they may not know how to. So I think that makes a big that can make a big difference. And I don't know that we have any questions at this moment, but feel free to ask if you guys have questions. But I did want to make sure we had 1 minute at least, Brad, for you to share. Um, there was a resource in the book for rightquestion.org, and you talked about the ability to ask really good questions and to learn to ask great questions. And I thought you could
yes.
just leave everybody with that for a minute.
Yes, there's something that I've learned called the question formulation technique. And I discussed that in my book, and Right Question Institute did come up with that. And they actually allowed me to use it in my book, which was really cool. It's something that I use all the time with my students, and it's just a way to help students learn how to ask better questions. And so that's something that we don't always teach our students. So it's a process, it's a technique to kind of go through and ask and refine and reflect on how to ask the right questions that will allow you to get the answers that you are looking for.
Um, so we'll share that link when we send out the information. And there was a couple of questions. Todd, I know you had a question specifically about keeping track of assignments. I think that might be great for us to talk about. I mean, you certainly, Brad, if you had any answers in terms of trying to help, but he doesn't like it because I have to ask him about the same assignments over and over again. I'm happy to, if you want to email info@thestudypro.com, I'm happy to kind of talk through what you're seeing and give some suggestions. So Brad, I know we only had a minute, but if you want to comment on that, or how you recommend using the ABLE process if you have a child that may have a challenge focusing?
Yeah, so I think most children, developmentally just naturally have difficulty focusing, and some might have more challenges than other. But I really think the ABLE cycle helps to provide the structure to just slow down the process of learning, so that you can, instead of focusing on, 0 to 100, like, oh, I just want to focus on, how do I solve this problem or how do I answer it, right? The ABLE cycle itself, I think, helps with it because it provides a structure. One is just really focusing on that targeted question, and having like a learning target that you really want to try to achieve. And so chunking it and segmenting in those 4 parts, I really think helps to provide more structure so that you can dedicate your time and attention onto those 4 individual pieces rather than thinking about the whole thing as just a whole. And so I found that by focusing on those 4 different pieces throughout the process of learning and throughout trying to find an answer or solve a problem really does help with the attention piece, because you can dedicate your time and energy on individual pieces throughout the entire process, if that helps.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of the chunking piece idea, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
To be able to break it down and sitting next to them and having them almost like drawing it and physically focusing, like visually focusing on each piece. I think
Yeah.
that's a great suggestion. So we do really appreciate all of your time, Brad, and just extraordinary um, data and I think insight into how we really need to think about raising our kids to be um, for high LQ and not just IQ and EQ,
Exactly.
and really thinking about that. What role can we play and how can we model that as parents? And so we really appreciate it. I know we got some comments about how it's great suggestion of praising effort over intelligence, and I think even as specifically as possible is what I know we all recommend you as well, Brad, in terms of what did that student specifically do? Was it a new way that they studied? Was it that they started their work on time? Was it that they studied over time? So, what was it that helped them to, what was the effort specifically? I think that's so important versus, yeah, you're so smart, or wait, I don't know why you didn't do as well because you're so smart.
Right.
And I think that really wraps up from the beginning of your presentation. So we really appreciate you being here. We're going to share all the resources with everybody. Thank you. Congratulations again on your book and your um, upcoming second edition
Yeah.
addition to your family. We're very excited for you.
Thank you all so much for
Okay.
having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun to share a little bit about my experiences, and hopefully you'll be able to take some away from that. So thanks so much.
Yep. Yep. Thank you again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.